The writer Kathleen Norris led writing exercises for many years with elementary students. And she would do this exercise with them. I'll make a deal with you, she'd say. First, you get to make noise, and then you get to make silence. She writes, what interests me most about my experiment is the way in which making silence liberated the imagination of many children. Very few wrote with an originality about making noise, but silence was another matter. One boy came up with an image of strength as being as slow and silent as a tree. Another wrote that silence is me sleeping, waiting to wake up. One third grader's poem turned into a prayer. Silence is spiders spinning their webs. It's like a silkworm making its silk. Lord, help me to know when to be silent. And in a tiny town of western North Dakota, a little girl offered a gem of spiritual wisdom that I find myself returning to when my life becomes too noisy and distractions overwhelm me. This little girl wrote, silence reminds me to take my soul wherever I go. One of the favorite things I used to do at Christmas time when I was a kid was to lie by myself on the couch at night and look at the Christmas tree lights. I could squint my eyes and make them go all kind of fuzzy. Or if I just moved my head to the left and to the right, they would seem to be twinkling in the cedar branches of our tree. Somehow in my memory, it was all very quiet, as if I was the only one in the house, although I know that wasn't true because I did have two parents and two younger sisters. But I felt safe and cozy and quiet and just fine being on my own in the silence. This is still a favorite thing of mine to do, though I find it is harder to let myself do it. You know, I want to acknowledge for just a moment that we don't all have happy and safe memories of being in the silence. That in this time of short sunlight and long nights, the lights of many kinds kind of call to us to simply sit and look. The stars in the winter sky, the candles of the menorah, the Christmas tree lights, the Star of Bethlehem, a single chalice flame in our home. They call to us to look for the loving presence that is with us all the time. And I imagine, as we heard the story of Hanukkah from Steve this morning, I imagine what the Hebrew people, upon entering their destroyed and desecrated temple, might have done. Maybe later there was wailing and yelling and crying and distress of that kind. But first, there might have been nothing but just some stunned silence. I think of the news footage I have seen of people walking through what once was their home after a national or a natural disaster has swept it away. Just sad, exhausted people walking in silence remembering what was. Perhaps it's that silence, in that silence, that they are able to find even just a seed of what could yet be. I wonder if that's what it was like for the Jewish people after the temple was destroyed. Just silence for a time before the temple lamp was found, and one small bottle of oil. As Steve explained, one small bottle of oil that would not last for 8 days when a new supply could be found. So they did not expect that one small bottle of oil to last long enough, but they lit the oil lamp anyway, and they rededicated their temple, their sacred space. They did not expect it to be enough. And maybe they sat in the dark for a while, wondering if they should even bother. But maybe it was in that silence, in that quiet darkness, that they heard that still small voice that the prophet Elijah heard. All seemed to be lost, and yet it was not. A presence still arose in the community, a presence within, and in that silent considering of their decision to make, they did make that decision to rebuild, to rededicate themselves to their highest values. The poet Gunilla Norris writes, "Within each of us, there is a silence as vast as a universe. We are afraid of it, and we long for it. When we experience that silence, we remember who we are, creatures of the stars, created from the cooling of this planet, created from dust and gas, created from the elements, created from time and space, created from silence." She writes, "Silence brings us back to basics, to our senses, to ourselves. It locates us. Without that return, we can go so far away from our true natures that we end up quite literally beside ourselves." End quote. How do you tap into that kind of silence that paradoxically is a presence, not an absence of something? How do we remember the kind of silence that connects us to the ground of our being, to what or who created us, to the mysterious fact of this universe, which some simply call God? Most of us, myself included, when we stop to sit in silence, only first encounter the wind or the earthquake or the fire like Elijah. I think of the wind as the mind that just blows this way and that way and this way and that way. Or the earthquake as the mind that just and tumbles and moves. Or the fire as the mind that burns and keeps us awake at night, wanting things to be different than they are. This is why spiritual practice is practice. It takes practice to cut through the wind and the earthquake and the fire and get to the underground silence where the roots grow, a place where you can be still and know yourself as whole and holy, a part of this good creation. Now, I am not here to say that daily silent meditation is something that everybody should be doing. And if you're not, shame on you. I don't meditate silently daily. There are many ways to get to that silence. As the Sufi poet Rumi wrote, there are 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the ground. But I do want to invite us all to consider, how is it that we encounter that vast silence within us and learn to not be afraid of it? What is your way of doing this? Just this month on Tuesday mornings, I've been offering a 30-minute meditation time. And actually, we sit in silence for about 10 minutes, maybe a little more. We begin with a reading. We have time for silent sitting. We hear the same reading again, and we have a few minutes for sharing at the close. So 30 minutes total, 10 minutes of silence. And during that time of silence, I've been inviting everyone to stay on video and keep themselves unmuted so that we can feel more like we are engaging this practice together. After all, it is not about quieting everything on the outside. It's about finding a quiet on the inside. I can hear a person cough or another person move, or I can hear a dog bark in the background. And it reminds us that we are all alive and connected in time and space with others, even if we aren't sitting in the same room together. And we have the experience that silence does not have to equal loneliness. Others are with us. Eventually, we may live into the knowing that we are never alone, even in solitude. In silence, there is a greater presence of love holding us all the time. The still small voice of love eternal, as our opening hymn says. Or the silence that reminds us, as the young child in North Dakota wrote, the silence that reminds us that our souls are with us wherever we go. This winter, this holiday season like no other, may you have the experience of love abiding with you in the deep silence within you. May it bring you knowledge of your sacredness. May it bring you courage. May it help you know the next right step. May it bring you to faithful affirmation that life perseveres and that we have all that we need to increase the light in this world. That is my hope for you and for all of us this holiday season. May it be so. Amen.